Maybe people aren't coming to God and are filling the gap with other addictions because their notion of who God is or what God is so distorted. So if my parents are an interface between me and God, a first way of knowing authority, and someone has a terrible experience with a parent or, run-ins with the law, etc., and God has been presented in particularly negative way, then how does that person choose life and choose God rather than the addiction?
Well, this is lesson 6 in this course, which is the big part of it is, and I find this in my own experience, it's not what you teach people, it's almost you have to unteach them of bad stereotypes or negative stereotypes. So they should be open to hearing something. And that's, I would say sometimes that's 90% of the work.
Unlearning.
Right, unlearning what is their pre-assumptions and their what's the word I want to use, preconceived notions about particular topics, especially God, religion, and faith. All you have to do is watch a Woody Allen movie and you see all the stereotypes come out and everybody identifies with them. In South Africa, where they respect rabbis and authority, it doesn't work so well. But whenever I tell a joke about rabbis in America, everybody laughs. Like the joke, the rabbi the 2 guys get lost on a hot air balloon, and they're looking how to find their bearings. They yell down, they see 2 people playing golf. They say, "Where are we?" So one guy yells up, "You're in a hot air balloon." And then a gust of wind comes, whisks away the balloon, and one guy says, "What was that?" He says, "That was surely a rabbi." How do you know? Because what he said was true but irrelevant. And everybody bursts out laughing, especially secular crowds, because what I said is true and relevant. The point is that, yes, religion has been hijacked and has been distorted by the people who misrepresent it. And I could speak for myself. I grew up in a religious and traditional home. And a big part of my own life was to separate the fruit from the peel and figure out what is Judaism and what they're telling me is Judaism. I'm now going to be marrying off a couple. And I'm dealing with one of the parents of the couple that happen to be traditional. And they're making me crazy about things that all out of guilt I discovered for her grandmother. Like things that are completely not even halachic or necessary. But in their mind, this is what they have guilt over. Some technical details. The point is there's big distortions around religion, as you point out, the stereotypes. And as long as you don't get rid of them, we're not talking about the same God. And may the real God appear. But I wanted to say something about the emotional resistance, because it's the same idea. It all begins with cognitive, because cognitive is easier for a mind to travel to places where your heart is not ready to go. Let's put it that way. So when you understand and you learn, which is why it's so important to understand the soul of Torah, the spirituality of Torah, because it lifts you to a place that's beyond you. Whereas if you learn just the technical details, they're important to how to be a Jew, but it doesn't bring you to another place. And then a miracle happens, a miracle. What happens is when the mind is there, it begins to slowly weaken the resistance of the heart. It's not immediate, but it at least opened up the possibility. It's almost like sending out a scout, check out and tell me if it's safe enough for me to go. The heart wants safety. It wants security. It's comfortable with its status quo because it's secure. It could be unhealthy. This is why you have battered wife syndrome. You have things that are terrible that people will tolerate because it became their comfort zone, as horrible as it sounds. But the heart, when it feels trust, and the mind tells it, something, there may be another reality, the heart begins to peek out, like a child peeking out from a scary, frightening place and say, maybe I can change my status quo. And in Judaism and Torah, this is really the hard work, what we call avodah, the real work. How do you get your heart that's become accustomed to being a victim or a sufferer or prosperous and spoiled to want to change? Why should you change? So I'm comfortable. Why would I want to change my life? Without a vision of something greater, you're definitely not going to want it. So it starts with the vision, but then you could train people with techniques. And
I'm reminded of the previous Rabbi speaking about how a child, a grandchild, or a child can play with the father's beard, which represents a very lofty state, but the father needs to bend down to pick up the child. So I guess what you're saying is that each of us needs to parent our own child and kind of come to that place that is resistant to the truth, but speak to it at its own level and lift it up.
And the challenges are many, because it means you need to find the knowledge in the books, if you have access, which is a whole challenge. How do you find access, translations and stuff? You need to find teachers and mentors that are not misrepresenting, because many, without mentioning names, they think they're doing the best job possible, and they're distorting it, to be very honest. I see many people who even use their knowledge as power and control. And they feel, oh, people who know less need me to direct them. They're almost like not empowerment and individuality emerging. It's very challenging. I mean, I deal with this all the time. That's why I speak about it.
You know, I often say Chabad is a chiropractic adjustment for the soul. That you shift your consciousness, and then it will bring that cognitive work, if you can find the right teacher and the sources and meditate deeply enough, it brings about a shift.
I wrote an article a few years ago called How to Find a True Rabbi. I get a call, an email from a fellow who's part of the search committee in a Reform synagogue in Midwest. He says, we're going to use your criteria. And I don't use the word chassid there or anything like that, but I said to him, please let me know who you find.
Did he?
Not yet. Because really, ultimately, the criteria is
maybe
finding someone
they didn't find anyone. That was the catch.
It's the key thing to know is that the gems are there. With all that we've gone through, 2,000 years and all the challenges, the light has not been lost. That is critical. But it doesn't mean it isn't difficult to find. It is sometimes very difficult to find. But the good news is words from the heart enter the heart, which also means that if it's not words from the heart will resist. So I always tell people, listen with your hearts. But obviously a heart can be manipulated. A heart could also be blocked. So you can't etch it in stone. But the fact is sincerity comes across. And especially those of us that have been hurt or are skeptical, cynical, bitter, those are the hardest nuts to crack. But on the other hand, those are the people that if you do reach them, you've said something true. Because they're not going to buy into it unless it really touches them. So everyone has a purpose, even the cynics, I guess, because it forces us to really get the message home.
Right. You're talking about reframing our notion of God, unlearning the stereotypes that we have.
And then relearning.
And then relearning something that is accurate, authentically Jewish. How do you think that that can impact a person's life? And what I mean by this is, you know, if we look at our relationships and our interactions with others as existing on a physical level, and by physical I don't only mean matter, a material level, but even emotional, intellectual depth that I want in a relationship. My personal experience is that there is a lid on my life without God. And when you speak about discovering an authentically Jewish God, how do you see that as changing the quality of our lives, whether it's our relationship with ourselves or in the context of a marriage, friends, work? What shifts when you discover that relationship, authentic relationship with the Creator?
I think one of the deepest stereotypes about God, it may not sound so dramatic what I'm going to say, but if you think about it, it's really the root of it. You know, many people, the stereotypes can be a God that is vengeful, angry, demanding, a master, and we're the slave, a policeman, someone wants to punish us. I mean, there's all kinds of, but there's something deeper and more subtle, and that is that God is some type of outside entity. You think in terms of, I turn my eyes up to heaven and God is there somewhere. So obviously anyone that thinks knows it's not, it's a symbolic. But there's something deeper. It's not here. In other words, when I'm crying and I'm lonely, there's no God with me. Maybe I need God then.
But you're not holding God within.
But it's not right, exactly. That it's not the inner essence of reality. It's some outer experience. Now that alone, of course, is, as we know in spatial terms, anyone that's familiar with even rudimentary mysticism knows that doesn't make sense. because only we occupy space. We also think of our souls that way. The soul goes somewhere.
Right.
It's going. Where does it go after we die? So I always answer, when people ask me that question, I said, that's an arrogant question. It's like a refrigerator asking electricity, where do you go when they pull the plug? And the electricity answers, what do you mean where I go? I've always been there. I'm my natural place. You were just invented 100 years ago, and you contain me, and now you think you're it. Because our perception, our distortions, we think we're it. And God is some novelty. When in Hasidic terminology, God is it, and we're the novelty. So that type of shift of consciousness is critical, because then you start seeing yourself, you know what, if I was at my best, if I was able to actualize my fullest potential, if we were able to strip all the layers of my life and get to the core child in its purest form, what does it look like? The answer is, that's your Tzelem Elokim, that's the God, the piece of God within you. When people hear this, they're shocked to hear that. They don't think it that way. They think, I'm me, and it's good to have God in my life because God could help me. God is faith and trust in something beyond me, which isn't untrue, but it's missing the most important part, that the essence of who you are is a piece of God that has just been contained in a box, layered, concealed. And the goal is to discover it. Why am I saying that? Is because when you think that way, then every aspiration you have is enhanced by discovering that godly part of yourself. Your love, your relationships, the home you want to build, your career.
Because that's the point of departure for everything.
In other words, reaching your fullest dreams, your greatest dreams, your aspirations is really reaching, in my words I would put it, that's the God in you, emerging and coming to the surface.
But would you equate that inner point of who we are as God in a general sense? You know, you're saying that God exists.
No, I should qualify.
Inside of you.
I should qualify. That's not, but it's as it says, God fills existence, but God existence doesn't fill God. Absolutely. I was going to add that, because in the lesson, that's the two parts that I talk about. You see, what I just discussed is critical because most people don't think this way. They only think of the God beyond. But the key thing to remember is that you're one piece of it. You're one piece. In other words, God, in a sense, was able, in his own mysterious way, to package himself, a microcosm of a part of God that you're created in the divine image. But the divine is not your image. That means that discovering that includes also the awe and recognizing that the totality of God is beyond you and I and everybody. But the key is to remember that the relationship with God is like a relationship with two people who love each other. There's a point of intimacy where they can't separate, where they're inseparable, a place of complete unity. But they are two individuals, so there has to also be a sense of space and boundaries. So in Judaism it's called Ava and Yira. Ava is love of God. We have sometimes the love God. And then you have fear God. I don't like the word fear because it's very negative, but awe of God. Now the love is the idea of that you can have a relationship with God, a close relationship. You can emulate God's ways. You can, by expressing your talents, you can become godly. Your giving, your intelligence, you can think like God, you can feel like God. But at the same time, there's also the sense where you realize God is beyond you and that you're not God, that there's a force and there's an entity, a reality that is beyond you. Now, how these two balance is very similar to how in a relationship, individuality balances with the oneness. And I would put it is that we always have to remember that God is ultimately beyond anything we will ever imagine. The gift is that he gave that part of his beyond into us.
And that's what gives us access to the beyond.
And that's what answers the ultimate question, whether it's about self-actualization or it's about being godly. The answer is that if it's self-actualization driven by your needs, then it's you. But if it's self-actualization because you are now becoming an extension of the divine self, and it's driven by humility and not by me being, more awards or being more complete, then paradoxically that's your ultimate self. Is when you're, as paradoxical as it sounds, it's when the beyond, God the beyond becomes one with the God within, then you've reached that's ultimate state of unity.